Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the What If. Chapter 19. Prelims Part 1. Baki stared at the man known as the God of Shinobi. What response is there to that man asking why he shouldn't kill you and your charges? Bluster may only provoke him to show it wasn't an empty threat. Invoke the law. If he was threatening them, then he clearly didn't care about the ramifications, which meant the Sandaime knew. Not suspected, not had reason to believe but knew. And Baki knew he was well and truly fucked. If by some miracle, and Baki had no illusions that it would take the interference of a real deity, he could escape the Sandaime and Danzo, both there would still be Kakashi, Guy, Asuma, and Kurenai Yuhi. No need to mention the Anbu that were certainly hiding in the shadows like the kill-happy psychos they were. And speaking of kill-happy psychos, Baki should have known something was categorically wrong when his team arrived. First, he thought nothing of it as they looked pristine and Gaara was reading that accursed orange book. It was Temari that informed him that a black scroll revealing the little, blonde demon was the son of Minato Namikaze. Baki instantly knew that karma was real and the Yondaime had gotten his revenge beyond the grave. The man grimaced at the revelation. He remembered the one and only time he'd met the Yellow Flash. It was as Baki was attempting to, unbeknownst to him, chat up said man's girlfriend. In Baki's defense, he'd recently been promoted as the Cage's number 2 and was riding high. He saw a beautiful redhead in his village and thought he'd take his chances. She was pleasant enough but didn't seem to be picking up his intent, and Baki soon recognized why when she openly greeted Minato-kun in such a joyous fashion. Baki would never forget those blue eyes. They were devoid of all feeling, of any trace of humanity as he peered into Baki's very soul. The Suna man tried to make a graceful exit, but before he could, the future Hokage threatened he'd never forget Baki. Never. Baki could still remember how his spine felt exposed to the most frigid air ever created, even as they were in the middle of a desert. Fear. He feared that man and felt no shame in it. I didn't bring you down here to gaze into my eyes longingly, Baki-san. Don't flirt with me, boy, answer my question. Hiruzen ordered, and any additional thoughts on the Yondaime's hellspawn completing his father's revenge would have to wait. You will have to forgive me, Sandaime-sama, but I don't understand why I would be asked such a question. Konoha and Suna are allies in good standing, Baki said as he had nothing else to go on. Danzo frowned at the Suna Junan's response. That was the exact wrong way to play this, especially with Hiruzen in the current emotional state he was in. He almost wanted to help the man out, if for no other reason than to impart some actual tradecraft into the youngster. Damn, kids had no soft skills anymore. Yes, Baki-san, we are allies. That's why I let it slide that you brought your Jinchuriki into my village without notice. The boy seemed fine enough, a little too taken with Jiraiya-kun's books, but he's a growing lad and I won't begrudge him a healthy interest in the fairer sex. I even ignored your other student following around Naruto-kun. Trying to get information on a competitor is logical, and if he could have gotten anything of value following Naruto, then he deserves a promotion. But what I'm having a hard time with, and the reason you may get intimately acquainted with the soil of Konoha, is Suna working with my trader of a former student. Baki schooled his features, but that he needed to was as much a confession as a genuine reaction would have been. Internally, he was near a total freak out. His nerves were shot, worn down by the state of his team, by the reveal that Minato had a son, and now this. He was trying not to, but his body wouldn't stop tensing, preparing for a fight. He might go, but he wouldn't go quietly. Suna is doing no such thing, and for you to even accuse us of, Baki started, making a show of taking offense, but was interrupted by Hiruzen opening a folder. Inside was the dossier of one of the Suna competitors, information foreign villages had to submit to the host for security reasons. But Baki knew this wasn't a true Suna ninja. She was an Oto Kunoichi that was given false Suna credentials to hide the alliance between the two villages. I see you recognize her. She, along with 8 other subordinates and Orochimaru, infiltrated the second exam so my student could set up a trap for Naruto-kun. Of the 10 members involved in that little plot, only 2 survived and none escaped. It was effortless getting Kin to talk, Hiruzen mocked. He hadn't spoken to the girl at all. His Anbu had found her tied up just outside the blast zone of Naruto's barrier. She was suffering severe chakra exhaustion, but they were able to stabilize her enough for Yamanaka to perform a mindwalk. What he learned had only increased Hiruzen's fury. It wasn't hard to put the pieces together, to see the finals of the Chunin exams as a perfect time to stage an attack. It would dishonor Konoha and possibly display Suna's strength. Orochimaru would have gotten to burn things down and possibly, if it were his aim, kill Hiruzen. Even with the mercy he'd shown his student, Orochimaru hated Hiruzen. Your team will continue to participate in the exams, going as far as their talents allow them. Once the second exam is over, you will send word to Rasa. He will attend the finals if he wishes to ever see his children again. 2 escorts, Baki. 2, and I wouldn't see this as an opportunity to demonstrate his cleverness. I won't lure my cage into a trap, Baki said firmly, causing Hiruzen's eyes to thin into slits. It seemed the man thought they were undertaking a negotiation. Your letter or your head, I make no comment on which I'd prefer, but understand those are the choices before you. Get out of my sight, Hiruzen commanded, and Baki obeyed, returning to his team with 2 Anbu as escorts. You need to calm down, Danzo advised. I am calm. Really? Because Baki isn't the only one that thinks you plan to kill Rasa once he arrives, consequences be damned. I trust you put together what their plan was. Yes? Hiruzen asked, and Danzo looked mildly offended. Of course, I'm not an asshole. Then, should I not want to extract some pain from Suna for daring to betray us? To plot to invade us? None of the Gokage would be so calm about this. I would already have his people mobilized. Danzo answered, making no secret of his true position on Hiruzen's argument. And if I thought the invasion that clearly isn't going to happen was your motivation, I might entertain your argument. It'd be nice to kill a cage before I depart, just a great item on the resume. But you're acting the same way you behaved when Enzo died. The room turned frigid as the Hokage stared at Danzo, but the man felt no fear. This needed to be said. You were blinded by rage, Hiruzen. You let your students run wild to claim your revenge. So, if you're sitting here saying it isn't in you to do it, then save it. Naruto-kun isn't dead, nor is he my S. Isn't he? Are you really so unaware? It is only your age and respect for Minato's sacrifice that you claim him as a grandson, but I know a father's pride when I see it. Of course I'm proud. Naruto's deficits were directly and indirectly caused by me. He was barely verbal when we first met. He worked hard to overcome them, making the best of what little time I could devote to him. He was and is owed more than I can ever give him, and has turned out fantastically. Minato and Kushina deserve to be here to see his growth, so any excess of pride you see from me is my feeling so on their behalf. He'll be the future of this village, so to correct you, Danzo, if I decide Rasa is to die at some point in the future, it would be with the village in mind. Hurting Naruto hurts the village. Now who's being clever? Danzo quipped. Get out, Hiruzen ordered, but there was no heat to the words. I will, but only because I don't want to have to deal with Tsunade when she finds out her student is laid up. You might end up digging that mass grave anyway. Have fun with that, Danzo said as he departed. It was Hiruzen who now facepalmed, thinking of his most volatile student. He could only will the headache away. Hiruzen sat in his ceremonial chair as he watched the start of the preliminary round. 5 days had elapsed and he'd been incredibly busy adjusting to Orochimaru's capture, as the aged shinobi was not satisfied with using a standard cell. He also saw Naruto off before he was taken into protective custody for the duration of the remaining exams. Even with all he'd done, there was still much to do, but for now he had to sit and watch as the next generation took their first steps into becoming the protectors and not the protected, from kings to knights of the Great Tree. Hayate had done a serviceable job of explaining the rules, and the first match was to be decided. Ino Yamanaka versus Karui of Kumo. The screen displayed. The heiress of the Yamanaka clan made her way down to the floor, her back experiencing phantom pains from where her opponent slashed her in the forest of death. She wasn't looking forward to experiencing that again. She tried to shake off an uncharacteristic bout of self-doubt. She never suffered for confidence, but she'd come up short against this Kunoichi, her whole team against the duo from the hidden cloud. Your boyfriend won't be here to protect you this time, Karui said as she walked up to Hayate. Ino grimaced. She couldn't disagree. If not for his timely interference, Team 10 may not have survived the forest. 3 clones backed off the 2 from Kumo, Naruto managing to sink 2 shuriken in the side of Omoi as he was attacking Choji. It was a revelation to the heiress as she'd never seen Naruto in mission mode, so to witness him so focused and cold was quite the departure from the sweet, awkward boy she'd come to befriend. A glancing, traitorous thought also noticed he looked cute in all black and backing down enemy ninja. Ino didn't bother to respond to Karui's insult, more focused on how jittery her hands felt as they reached to the sheathed blades at her back. One benefit of this rematch, the Kumo Genin's ambush had been so successful she hadn't had time to retrieve her knuckle knives. Whereas she knew Karui was a kenjutsu user with knowledge of at least one Raiden jutsu. "Are the combatants ready?" Hayate asked. The two girls, now just a few meters apart, both nodded. "Fight." A clang was heard through the spacious room as Ino deflected Karui's downward slash. She rotated away from the blade, hoping to find an opening. She hadn't had a lot of time with her knives, but Asuma-sensei drilled her on the basics. Constant motion, in and out, never overcommitting. Hers was not a style built on power, at least not yet. Karui must have read her intention as she swiftly brought the sword around in a horizontal motion, ensuring Ino couldn't charge in. The Team 10 kunoichi backed off and the two ninja reset. Karui went on the offensive again, Ino deflecting the sword strikes and moving away, but she'd allowed herself to get predictable. After another defectly, she was shifted into a kick to the ribs as Karui had accurately guessed her escape route. The Kumo swordswoman followed up with a right cross strong enough to send Ino stumbling back, until she completely lost her footing and fell. Karui stuck her sword in the ground and performed a series of hand signs before pointing her glowing hand toward Ino. The electromagnetic murder jutsu hit true, but Karui was too slow to realize she'd made contact with a substitution log. Slow enough for Ino to deliver two cuts to the back of Karui's legs, one each. Karui tried to spin kick Ino, but the Yamanaka was moving in the same direction and dug in a body blow before she backed away. With the proper form and her knuckle knives, she knew the punch hurt. She could see Karui fighting the urge to cover her ribs. Angered that the Konoha princess managed to actually wound her, Karui retrieved her sword and began a furious attack. The sound of metal on metal echoed throughout, neither fighter willing to back down. But it was clear to every senior ninja, Ino was faring well, but unless she came up with a plan, she'd lose to her technically superior opponent. As if they willed it, Ino blocked another downward strike but misjudged the distance. Karui being much closer than times previous, Ino was closer to the hilt. For the first time in their fight, Karui's blade tasted blood. Ino bit her lip in response. It wasn't an incredibly deep cut, but it wasn't shallow either. Her purple attire was staining itself with her life essence, a shoulder wound was limiting and painful. If she didn't end this soon, the blood loss may start to affect her. Sacrificing some of her defensive power, Ino used one of her knives to nick the back of Karui's hand. Ino ducked, feeling the sword leave her body, and hit Karui with a short uppercut that snapped the red-haired kunoichi's head back. As she circled away, Ino finished her assault with a leg kick to the back of Karui's knee. Knowing her enemy was behind her, Karui deftly performed a backward stab. It hit nothing, but it allowed her to shift away from Ino and get back to her feet. She wouldn't broadcast it, would do her best to never let anyone know, but her legs were feeling more and more numb. And that the hand that had been cut was starting to feel it as well let her conclude that the knives were poisoned with, she hoped, a paralytic. Karui was in an undesirable position. She didn't want to waste chakra. The proctor had explained that 3 of the participants would have to fight twice, and she didn't want to risk depleting herself should she be called again. But she couldn't continue taking damage. She needed to end this and receive treatment. The brash kunoichi settled on a blitz, a final, all-out assault to make the girl in front of her crumble. She sent chakra to her limbs, hoping the minor enhancement would be enough, and dashed toward Ino. If the previous exchanges had been intense, this felt murderously rabid to Ino. Karui had committed to an onslaught of fast and powerful strikes. Not as technical as she had been, but this was almost worse. Ino was being pushed back, barely defending, but even the defense was taking a toll. She was getting tired, worn down, and would be open for an unguarded attack soon. She had one more ace up her sleeve, but like almost everything else she hadn't mastered it, so was reluctant to use it. However, the situation demanded she either gamble or concede. She chose to gamble. First, she switched her tactics from deflecting the sword to dodging and evading it. The only reason she could manage it now, instead of when Karui was fresh, was Ino could see her poison had started to work. The attack was frenzied but Karui was ever so slightly slowing down. Ino used it to get in close, arms pulled toward her chest as she did so. Karui, taken off guard, lashed out with another right cross. It hit Ino square in the jaw but as it was in motion she ran her blade along the inside of Karui's forearm. The heiress hit the ground with a thud and it confused all that Karui didn't follow up. I quit, I need help. The Kumo Kunoichi shouted in mortal terror. Hayate was shocked but called the fight just as Ino got to her feet. I need a medic, I don't have much time. She screamed, not understanding why no one was coming to her aid, not even Samui. She put pressure on her arm trying to buy her precious moments and was so relieved when a medic appeared beside her and then whisked her off. Another medic doing the same for Ino. Hayate performed a simple water jutsu to clean up the blood as the next two names were selected. Gaara of Suna versus Seiki of Kusa. Gaara arrived on the floor, eyes having never left his book. He was getting to a good part and didn't have any interest in fighting some child. Forfeit or die, he warned his fellow genin but tuned the boy out when he didn't hear some version of, I quit. The sickly proctor called a start to the fight and Gaara felt his sand intercept something. Probably a kunai, he didn't really care. The main character had finally proven his valor and worth to his first love and was going to get to sample her sweet, sweet fruit. You could at least fight back, coward. The boy yelled. Gaara rolled his eyes in annoyance. He'd warned the fool, hadn't he? All of this was utterly pointless. Gaara willed all of his sand back in his gourd, all but a single grain. It floated peacefully on his index finger until he made a swiping motion toward his opponent. The projectile entered the Kusa genin's brain before he could even consider moving. Gaara was back with his siblings before the body hit the ground. How unyouthful, Gaara heard someone shout. He didn't bother to respond. Age was an illusion that gave false value to life. Fast or slow, death was simply the end of a meaningless existence. The Uzumaki showed him that, had given Gaara the gift of nothingness. Gaara longed to repay the Uzumaki by ending his life. After another pause to clean the arena floor, two more names were displayed. Kiba Inuzuka versus Sakura Haruno. Yay, finals, here I come. Kiba exclaimed as he dashed downstairs, eager to get this over with. While offended, Sakura understood why Kiba was so confident as the academy version of her would be a total gimme fight for the Inuzuka. Even before her time in the Forest of Death she would have assumed she was overmatched. The pink-haired Kunoichi had such a low opinion of her abilities because she was continually comparing herself to her team in her disastrous missions. It wasn't until she faced off with normal genin did the Haruno realize she wasn't as weak as she thought she was. Sasuke was a genius and obsessed with training to reach his goal of killing a certain person. She didn't have his drive, certainly hadn't had it at the tender age of 8. Kakashi was the Konoha Junin and while he could come off lazy, she'd seen what he could do when he turned it on so of course she couldn't compare herself to him. And Naruto, well, she didn't really understand Naruto even after having trained with him for months. Having Kakashi-sensei inform Sasuke-kun and her that Naruto survived his face-off with Orochimaru, though the pride in Kakashi's eye led her to believe he did a little more than survive the encounter, made her conclude that Naruto was just different. She wasn't weak, just weaker than the trio of monsters she'd been teamed with and felt no shame in it. It was simply a goal to reach, she'd close the gap by hook or by crook. It was why she understood Kiba's confidence but she still planned to kick his ass. Both fighters got in their stances, Sakura making sure to stay light on her feet and waited. Fight, Hayate yelled and Kiba dashed toward Sakura, a feral swing aiming to knock her out in one blow. He was fast, faster than the Team 7 Kunoichi but not fast enough to completely overwhelm her. Sakura timed the strike, as she slid back just out of range while grabbing Kiba's wrist and pulling him forward. Out of position and defenseless, Sakura slugged him with an overhand right, landing on the Inuzuka's jaw. On instinct Kiba spun through the blow and kicked Sakura in the gut, forcing her off her feet as he rolled away. Kiba tried to fix the swimming feeling in his head by shaking it repeatedly. The fangirl was much stronger than he'd expected and while rash, he wasn't stupid. He couldn't treat her like a scrub. Finally clear, Kiba rushed at Sakura again but this time with a plan. As he entered striking range, he circled to her left and sidekicked Sakura on her hip. Stunned from the quick change of direction and power of the blow, Sakura absorbed a follow-up kick as Kiba's shin met her neck. The Pinkett was in a world of pain and couldn't think, forcing her to act solely on instinct. This surprised Kiba as he expected her to either curl up from his attacks or try to create distance, which was why he was attempting to close the distance before she could retreat. Sakura opted to get closer and throw a pair of short uppercuts. The first was off the mark, it landed but under the jawbone near Kiba's left ear. The second one was right on, landing under his chin. Once again Kiba was startled and dazed by Sakura's power but sobered up immediately when he felt her clinch the back of his head. Clinching was something Hinata did, so he knew how bad the position could be and how to get out of it. He dropped low, dug his shoulder into her stomach as he grabbed her legs and took her down, mounting her in one smooth motion. "Ah, fuck," Kiba yelled, denied the chance to enjoy his advantage. Not thinking, he went to reach for the kunai stabbed into his leg, not paying attention to Sakura at all. For his momentary lapse he was awarded a meeting of his head to the floor as Sakura reached up and pulled him down. The thud could be heard by all in attendance. Sakura pushed Kiba off her and returned to her feet, gearing up to kick the potentially concussed boy in the head to end this, but Sakura had her own oversight to pay for. "Off," she gasped as Akamaru dove into the girl, his head buried in her gut with enough force to lift her off her feet. The little dog barked in warning. "Good job, buddy," Kiba complimented. He'd torn off part of his sleeve to wrap his leg with, having removed the kunai. It hurt to put pressure on his leg and he'd be noticeably slower because of it, but he was still confident he could win. "Come here, Akamaru, let's show her why she shouldn't mess with us." Sakura witnessed Kiba give Akamaru a pill, then the appearance of a cloud of smoke before it revealed a perfect replica of Kiba. The two got on all fours, chakra briefly surrounding their bodies. She didn't know why but performed a substitution jutsu, narrowly avoiding the Suga. She didn't have time for a repeat, so while attempting to dodge the second passing fang, Sakura felt her exposed side get shredded. She suffocated a scream as she held her side. Taking stock of her situation, she was outnumbered by a physically superior force, one at her front and the other at her back. She was injured, bleeding, and her mobility was hampered. It wasn't good. The smart play would have been to forfeit, as she'd done more than anyone expected of her. But she couldn't bring herself to do so. Utilizing her intellect, she formed a plan. Sakura dipped her hand in her kunai holster and charged at the Kiba in front of her. This was a desperation play, and if it didn't work she'd lost anyway, so she'd hold nothing back. Ignoring the agony from her wound, she continued charging. The Kiba behind her slowed due to the shock of her suicidal run toward his copy. The Kiba in front of her, taken by surprise as well, didn't perform another Suga, opting to just finish her with a single blow. Sakura threw the disc and performed the desired hand sign. The timing had been tight. The Kiba behind her had closed much of the distance between them but was still far enough away to not be affected, while the one in front of her was within the radius. He didn't know how to react when he was suddenly pulled toward Sakura with no control over his body, but the Pinkett did as she unleashed as much force as she could. The full extension of the punch was reached just as Kiba came into range. Perfectly placed. Which is why it was so disappointing when she saw the puff of smoke as she was tossed back. No time to dwell. Sakura turned in midair, the clapback seal essentially providing the entirety of the force for this next move. The real Kiba and she collided in mutual lariats, each proved to be too much for the other as the genin slumped on the floor in a double knockout. The medics escorted all three combatants to the medbay. All had come around before ever leaving the tower hall. Karen of Kusa vs Neji Hyuga. Karen was unsteady as she walked down the steps. Her time in the forest had been traumatic, if she were being frank. She'd sensed several copies of a chakra signature moving throughout the forest, and everywhere they went other signatures vanished. So, when she felt three of them heading toward her team, she was terrified. She wasn't a fighter, she wasn't even really a medic. She was one step above a tool and hated it. Kusa was going suck her dry like they had her mother. She'd warned her teammates and they chose to run, of course managing to cross paths with the largest bear in existence. Seiki had gotten wounded by the beast's paw and she resigned herself to dying and being eaten by a wild animal. Until one of those clone signatures showed up and knocked the bear out with a staff. She instantly recognized him, Uzumaki Naruto, and her other teammate had as well. The coward actually grabbed her and held a kunai to her throat, threatening to slit her open if he didn't leave. The boy looked confused, as he should have. She wasn't a valuable hostage, they didn't even know each other, but Kuro pressed the knife to her neck hard enough to draw blood. She remembered the boy telling her to make it to the tower, but Kuro thought it a challenge presented to himself. She healed her idiot teammates and somehow managed to make it, but had no clue why she even bothered. The Hyuga looked menacing. Just short of evil, he clearly had a lot of anger, and she didn't need her abilities to pick that up as she stood across from him. The special Junin called the fight, and Karen was struck before she could even consider throwing up a guard. She dropped like her strings had been cut and a small trickle of blood dripped from her mouth. The medics rushed to her but could feel no heartbeat. They tried to revive her there, but their efforts failed and the head medic called it. Neji walked back to the overlook. He didn't know why Guy-sensei had asked him if he knew how to put someone in a false death state, or why he'd be earning $30,000 Ryo and the thanks of the Hokage to do just that, but Neji could use the money and wouldn't turn down the opportunity to impress the Hokage. He quickly looked up to his failure of a cousin as she was watching him intently. She then held her hand out, palm down, and rocked it back and forth. So. She'd just rated his performance, a flawless execution of precision Jukin. Okay. Mediocre. Average. If he thought he'd make it, he'd strike that arrogant brat down where she stood. So. The arrogance. Kurenai saw the interaction between cousins and leaned over to Hinata inquiring, was that wise? No one was more proud of Hinata gaining confidence and letting her real talents flourish, but she didn't want it to become hubris, especially not if it would endanger her. If your enemy is of choleric temper, seek to agitate him. Kurenai just nodded but said no more. All looked to the board to see who the next combatants would be. Tamari of Suna vs Tenten of Konoha. It confused all in attendance when, for vastly different reasons, both girls adopted murderous grins. Chapter 20. Prelims Part 2. Hello, Tenten, Naruto greeted as he approached her. Team training hadn't started yet, so she was just doing some target practice until Guy-sensei and Lee arrived from their daily bout of psychosis. She smiled, not having seen her mutual Fuinjutsu user in several weeks. Hi, Naruto, how are you? I am well. I came to ask a question, he informed her. Sure, I have a bone sword, do you want it? Tenten looked at Naruto, remaining silent and blinking slowly. It appeared he'd gotten more brazen in his perversions, even incorporating metaphors for dick. I know you know that's a nap, holy shit, that's a literal bone sword. Her tone going from chastising to gleeful surprise. She thought all the Kagaya were dead. How did you get that? Where did you meet a Kagaya? We fought and he stabbed me with it. That put a damper on her excitement. Are you all right? Yes, I healed, and of the two of us he had the greater odds of dying from our exchange, Naruto explained. Why you killed a Kagaya? I couldn't confirm it at the time, so I do not know, but possibly. Either way, I have this sword and thought you'd put it to better use. Naruto placed the weapon in Tenten's hands. It felt light but as sturdy as any steel sword she's ever wielded. I'm going to have to do something special in exchange, she said. Before thinking what that could be, but inspiration didn't take long as she recalled his fascination with her puppy Chow. I know. Have you ever had lemon squares? Why would you square a lemon? Naruto asked in clear confusion. You wouldn't, she said between laughs. Don't worry about it, I'll drop them off later today and you can tell me about your run-in with a Kagaya. She bypassed the hand he offered her to shake and gave him a quick hug before mushing his hair. Friends don't need to shake on things, Naruto. Soon a duet of yells filled the area, which signaled the start of their team training. Naruto spoke briefly to Lee and Guy before departing. Tenten arrived on the floor first, bone sword already unsealed. She wanted no delay in her offense once the fight started. Team 9 hadn't exactly had a rough time in the forests, Neji's Byakugan easily tracking approaching threats. She was thankful. The stress of having a price on her head had taken a toll, and even now she felt on edge. She was almost thankful she didn't have to fight any of her new friends, but was wary of the Suna Kunoichi. The weapons mistress doubted Suna would send any but their very best, and the girl appeared beyond confident. The Leaf Ninja resolved to do something about it. Tamari was working through on her issues, relishing the much more direct combat she was about to undertake. Since her father informed them of his harebrained scheme to invade Konoha, her life has been nothing but constant training, missions and worrying for her brothers. She hated that Rasa wanted to use Gaara as a weapon of mass destruction, and that was before the events of their travel to in time within the foreign village. And if that hadn't been enough, Baki's near mental breakdown after he'd spoken with the Hokage was still fresh in the young Kunoichi's mind. "They know," Baki said and then repeated. His body was shaking the way it would when gripped by a fear the mind can't process, that visceral fear ninja trained to overcome. That her sensei was experiencing that now threatened to send her into a similar state. While Kankuro was trying to get the full story from Baki, Temari could guess who they were and what they knew. The invasion was blown, Konoha was onto them. She, momentarily, wondered why they weren't dead yet. Her father wouldn't have wasted a second to kill Konoha ninja if the situations were reversed. "Temari, how close are you to the Namikaze's boy?" Baki asked. "We hung out once," she answered. Why would he be asking that now? Did Baki think attempting to kill Naruto would benefit them? If so, he'd really gone around the bend. The Hokage, he's close to the boy. I don't think he meant to reveal as much, but he did. Our survival might depend on you getting close to him. But it's not without risks. Temari didn't bother to point out she's neither a whore nor a concubine and seduction missions were beneath her. Baki knew it but had taken leave of his senses. "Yes, I'm sure the Hokage wouldn't appreciate us trying to manipulate someone he cares about," she reasoned but frowned when Baki shook his head. Her conclusion felt logical. What had she missed? The person responsible for that scroll and the fake bounties was Orochimaru, Baki said, all attempts to self-soothe having failed and his voice cracked. He brought 9 other ninja with him and baited the Namikaze's boy. Baki took a breath, all 3 of his students now interested in his tale. According to the Sandame, Naruto killed 8 of the 9 and captured Orochimaru by himself. Given everything else that boy has shown, he's clearly ruthless. Probably trained in secret since he could stand upright. If he believes you're playing him, you may not live to suffer the Sandame's wrath. It was unbefitting of her, disrespectful to her superior and an insult to her training, but Temari couldn't help it. She laughed. Deep belly laughs filled their temporary room, the sound pinging off the stone walls. What was she supposed to do? The boy that she shared lemon squares with and watched a Princess Gale movie as they chatted was some remorseless killer. It just didn't track. When she calmed herself, her more analytical processes took over. She liked him, that was true. He was cute and clearly had a way with the ladies if that Haku girl, who was only somewhat pretty, would give him some play. He was also the only boy around her age that showed any interest in getting to know her for her and not her connections to Rasa and Gaara. Temari looked back at the scroll. The most damning information was about Naruto, and if it were just an attempt to bait him, it stood to reason that all those other names had some connection to him. 3 girls, 2 heiresses. She recalled their first conversation. Even if the ninja were stronger than she initially thought, the girls were too weak-willed to rein him in or curb his nascent playboy tendencies. It was clear what was going to happen. Once she showed him what a real Kunoichi looked like, he'd forget those other girls. And maybe she'd escape with more than just her life. As Temari arrived across from Tenten, she stared at her first obstacle. She recognized the name, the person credited with the lemon squares she enjoyed as a movie snack. She'd try not to hurt her too bad, a quality baker was a precious commodity. "Fight," Hayate commanded, and Tenten went on the offensive with a flowing series of thrusts, the speed taking Temari by surprise. The Team 9 Kunoichi was relentless and resolved to leave her Suna counterpart no time to use her fan. While fast and practiced, the attacks were not enough to overwhelm Temari but left her no space to open her fan, forcing her to use it as a club instead. The exchanges became a battle of speed versus power as Tenten's nimble sword attack went against the heavy swings of Temari's war fan, neither side gaining an advantage. A loud clang was heard as both weapons clashed, the force knocking them out of each Kunoichi's respective hands. The weapons flew to either side of the arena, leaving the 2 young women unarmed. Tenten, as befitting the student of Meidagai, flowed into a sidekick that landed squarely on Temari's stomach. The impact sent her back, creating enough space to perform a jutsu. The hand signs were so fast and practiced, Tenten was too slow to react as the powerful blast of wind chakra lifted her off her feet and tossed her back like a rag doll. She hit the floor with a thud and rolled, attempting to disperse some of the force of the impact. She wasn't familiar with the jutsu, but she knew it hurt like one of Gai-sensei's youthful punches. But pain was to be endured and put to the side. The more pressing matter was her opponent running to her war fan, and Tenten could not allow that to happen. Her draw was smooth, her throw fast, and the result immediate. Ah! Temari yelled as she fell to the ground, a small throwing knife now embedded in her thigh, a small stream of blood running down her leg. Her mobility was hampered and she was still too far away from her primary weapon. She was starting to get concerned. That concern morphed into worry as she watched the bun-haired girl pull out 2 sealing scrolls and chain some hand signs. Then the girl was in the air, raining down numerous weapons upon Temari. With her fan, swatting away the weapons would be no problem, but she had to settle for twin galm palms. The jutsu did as she desired, blasting the weapons away. She felt the hairs rise on her neck when she saw the other girl smirk. Konkuro's shout of warning wasn't needed and would have come too late had Temari performed her substitution even a half a second slower, as some of the weapons had circled around and attempted to blindside her. Instead, they sank into her fan as she used the wall to steady herself. Her leg could barely support her weight, but she hoped, the great breakthrough had done more damage to Tenten, and observing the kunoichi, Temari was confident she was right. It didn't surprise her when the girl retrieved yet another weapon and charged her. Temari removed the knife from her leg and tossed, breaking Tenten's stride for just a moment. She continued on to her target, taking a swing of her Jien. Temari timed it well enough to sway inside Tenten's guard and punch her in the ribs. What were once merely fractured were not broken, and the shock from the blow left Tenten open and disarmed. Temari snaked an arm under Tenten's and secured the weapon's mistress's arm and head to her chest. She used her other arm to secure the lock and used her superior height to add pressure. Tenten tried to fight, but with her circulation cut off she was rendered unconscious in a matter of moments, Hayate promptly calling an end to the fight. Temari was announced the winner and both girls were escorted to receive medical aid. She hadn't known what she was expecting, something more makeshift, but the treatment center in the tower was anything but. The medics placed her and Tenten in the same room. 2 medics saw to Tenten's injuries, 1 to her wound. The 3 chatted, mentioning something about it being a shame that their cutie wouldn't make it to the finals. When one blamed a snake bastard, Temari put it together but was confused all the same. Did these 3 know Naruto, and if so, how could he be a combat medic? She wanted to dismiss it outright, as except for one notable exception, medics were unimpressive when it came to combat. It was just one more mystery about her friend. She didn't know but resolved to learn more about her future conquest. Temari was thankful when she was given something to read, the medics keeping all participants there unless they are called again or until the end of the preliminary round. She paid little attention to the last Kusa-genin that was brought in with a slash across his chest, nor the slacker with pineapple hair. She did get concerned when Konkuro was brought in but was refused access while the medics worked, one eventually informing her he was nearing chakra exhaustion. She had to bite her tongue when the severe-looking Hyuga was willed in while holding his privates. She must have clearly missed something good. Back at the arena, Hinata watched what could be her future opponents. She understood Choji forfeiting against Gaara after his display, but she'd have liked some more information about him. The Kumo-genin, Omoi, was a Kenjutsu and Raiden user. Lee was a Taijutsu specialist by necessity and a powerful one at that. She had no information on Sasuke as Ino chose not to return to face him. She was relieved. She'd have neutered the Uchiha if he harmed her Ino-chan. She felt bad for Shino-kun. It had been a good fight, but he'd succumbed to the poisons before he could finish the puppeteer, the 2 KOing each other. Finally, her name was called and it was against her cousin. He was already angry at her while she had no problem ignoring his diatribe. She used to think she understood why Neji hated her. It wasn't just that she was of the main branch, it was that despite her desire to remove the curse seal she was weak and ineffectual and held a higher status that her talents didn't merit. She accepted that and would never judge Neji for it. However, the better she got the more he resented her. No overture to become allies was met with anything but hostility. And, according to Tenten, He'd badmouth Naruto-kun. He must not have gotten the memo that no one did that. So, while she loved her cousin and sympathized to the best of her ability, his resentments, she was going to have to hurt him a little. Quote. And the near-mute support system isn't here to prop you up, Neji bit out, words she did pay attention to and caused her eyes to narrow. Okay, I'm going to hurt him a little more than a little, she thought. But new physical pain would be nothing, it was his arrogance that needed a hit. He finally shut up and the proctor finally called a start to the match. Neji's attack was fast, relentless, and textbook perfect. She'd have to devote herself for days on end to match the grace and form he achieved almost naturally. He was talented and diligently worked to further that talent, but talent could have a weakness. As much as Neji practiced, as great as he could be, no one was as obsessed with the gentle fist as the proud failure of an heiress. Her forms were never as crisp, didn't flow with power and purpose. Because she knew she was doing it wrong, she obsessed over the manuals, over the kata, just hoping to get it right. She never did, not to anyone's satisfaction. It made her hate herself, made her curse her very being. But her best friend gave her permission to be more than the Hyuga heiress, to do more than chase her father and her cousin. She was strong like Hinata, and so while Neji could perform the striking progressions perfectly, she could guard them with just as much ease. She could see the signs of frustration that took hold when he couldn't simply beat her down. The rigidity of his form, the frown and tension around his eyes. That his response was to simply try harder was predictable and disappointing. If Neji's offense was a volley of arrows hurtling toward their target, Hinata's defense was the rounded shield that could make any direct assault a glancing blow. When his frustration reached its apex, Hinata changed her guard, her feet now closer together and her hands palms out and chest level. She could almost read his thoughts, that she'd committed a blunder as her stance would slow down and weaken her defense. That her improvements were overstated and overrated, that he'd prove he was right all along. Confidence had returned, and it had nothing to do with anything he'd done. He'd given her control of his emotions and he hadn't realized. Neji closed in and Hinata remained patient, waiting for the perfect time to strike. Now, she shouted mentally and attacked. There was a collective grunt of empathy from every male in the arena. Neji had expected something, but not to be kicked squarely in the nuts. Hinata continued her assault as she grabbed one of his arms and pulled him close. Her second strike looked like a chop to some, but was really the thumb of her knuckle hitting a pressure point in Neji's throat, stunning him once more. A single arm takedown later and Neji was face down with his arm straightened above him and Hinata's shin on his neck as she executed an armbar. Submit or I'll break your arm, she demanded as she put pressure on the shoulder and elbow joints. His pride told him to let her break it, that she'd either be too cowardly to follow through or he'd beat her with one good arm. He grimaced at the pain, his arm reaching its literal breaking point. Neji was saved by his sensei, Guy calling a stop to the fight and Hayate taking heed. He wanted to yell at his sensei, wanted to blindly attack his cousin, but a small trickle of something down his spine told him to behave. He turned to see the Hokage, his face severe and removed from the kindly grandfather he normally portrayed himself as. Neji said nothing and allowed the medics to escort him away. Hiruzen congratulated all who moved on to the next round and had them draw for their next match. Hinata drew Lee, Omoi would fight Temari and Sasuke would face Gaara. She felt good, having beat her cousin and potentially earning a promotion in a month, but she wished she could share it with her best friend. His sensei had refused to allow her entrance into his hospital room. They had a lot to talk about. 2 days after he was brought to the tower, Naruto found himself in a poorly lit dungeon. The large doors with a paper seal upon them alerted him that he has finally entered the representation of his seal. He's in his shared mindscape with the Biju. Naruto had thought about what he would say to the Biju should they ever meet. Despite what the fox was said to have done, Naruto didn't really hate nor fear the beast, and neither would really benefit him as he was at least free. One large, red eye peered at Naruto, and anyone else would describe it as if something was staring into their very soul. Naruto just thought it was a really big eye, even compared to the toad's. He walked up to the gate. As he got closer, more of the fox was revealed and left Naruto with one thought. I like your ears, can I pet them? He asked, and the giant fox made a sound that was a mix of a cough and a laugh. Maybe when we get to know each other a little better, he said, and Naruto nodded as it was more than fair. I'm Uzumaki Naruto, what's your name? Well met, Naruto. You can call me Kyuubi. Is that your name? No, but my name is the only thing of value I still possess and will not give it out freely. Maybe one day, maybe. So, Warden, why have you stopped by for a visit today? Naruto didn't really understand it, but it wasn't a requirement that he did. If Kyuubi-san wanted to be called that, it was his prerogative. I didn't mean to. I was injured and rendered near unconscious. I may also be sedated given my injuries. Naruto squinted and thought about how he'd treat himself, ignoring that initially he was doing just that via his clone. Moving on from that, he decided, do you have some preferences for how you'd like the seal changed? I have plans but wanted to get your input before I finalized them. Short of you letting me go. Yes, Kyuubi-san, short of my letting you go. Not a dungeon, maybe some more natural surroundings like a forest or anything but this. And some reading materials, can you do that? I could link you to my mind palace, it has every book I've read since I was 9 years old. A forest is possible, I'll get to work on it when I can. Anything else? Why did you ask? It seemed only fair, Naruto answered, and he heard Kyuubi-san hum. Naruto walked closer to the cage and held his hand out, the Kyuubi looking at him in mild confusion. You shake on a deal and I believe we have reached an accord, Kyuubi-san. I think my hands might be a tad too large to shake yours. Make a fist instead, Kyuubi-san instructed, and Naruto did, with Kyuubi-san doing the same and tapping Naruto's. That's how Biju cement agreements. Don't make me regret this, Naruto. Even minor trust can be broken and some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. Naruto nodded and then plopped down. He hadn't come here intentionally, so didn't really know how to leave. Can you tell me about yourself, Kyuubi-san? Why don't you start? Okay, Naruto said, and for a time the pair shared stories about likes, dislikes and past adventures. When Naruto was being pulled away, a sign he was being awoken, he stated he'd come back, and Kyuubi-san huffed as if he didn't care. Once his jailer had left, Kurama looked down as a much smaller blonde, with whisker marks and red eyes peeked from his paws. I thought you were going to introduce yourself, little one, Kurama said, tenderly, to the small Naruto replicant. I got nervous, Datbeo. Maybe next time, Kurama offered, and Yami nodded. He seemed nice, Ibeo. You think he'll accept me? I don't know, little one, I don't know. Slowly stirring, the bright lights of the room proved discomforting, hurting his eyes slightly. Naruto ignored the sensation as he blurrily looked for a pitcher and cup. A silhouette aided him by filling the cup and putting it in his hand. Welcome back, Naruto-kun. You've had Tsunade-sama quite worried, the voice said. Shut up, Shizune, Tsunade barked, but there was no real heat to her words. If some little brat wants to get himself blown up fighting people he shouldn't, that's his business. No sweat off my brow. You still can't be honest with your emotions, Tsunade-chan. Hiruzen asked, ribbing his student. She was indeed very worried about you, Naruto-kun, insisting she treat you herself. Stop picking on me, sensei, she whined, not enjoying this at all. Naruto's vision finally clears and the water has alleviated his dry throat. He could see he was in the room with not only the three that had spoken but Hataki-sensei as well, who waved at his student. Feeling the need to address his other sensei, Naruto informs her, I didn't want to blow myself up. It was the most effective tactic at the time. Tsunade resisted the urge of slapping everyone with a smug look on their face, briefly forgetting who she'd been talking to. I know you didn't want that, Naruto, but you are nowhere near Orochimaru's level, so going to face him alone meant you'd have to put yourself at risk to even survive the encounter. Naruto agreed. He'd gone after Anko fully prepared to die. Grievous bodily injury was expected, but some part of him felt he should keep that to himself for now. Tsunade-sensei was one of the more difficult people for him to understand. Naruto-kun, I know this may be a bit much, but are you up for a debrief? I waited to get the details from you so your clone could focus, the Sandaime explained. Can I just show you? Naruto asked, and the Sandaime granted permission for all in the room to be informed as well. Naruto hastily linked all of their projection seals together and then replayed his time in the Forest of Death, the activities of the clones being held separately. As they watched the events, three Anbu were having a private meeting about the Uzumaki. Yugao, Tenzo, the commander started, the two agents knowing he was serious as he called them by their actual names. They were in a secured room within the exam tower, supposedly to get final orders before Naruto's month-long protection detail started, but Dragon had other plans. Uzumaki Naruto must be an Anbu operative, he stated. Commander, Yugao started but was silenced by the raised hand of her superior officer. I know. Sandaime-sama doesn't think he'd flourish with us. I disagree. And not only would he benefit but we would as well. Think of a Fuinjutsu master who could design equipment for us because he had first-hand knowledge of our needs as they would be his own. A high-class medic who could offer preventive measures or any number of things because he knows how taxing our missions are. Uzumaki Naruto could breathe new life into Anbu, and we need some innovation so things don't become stagnant. In exchange, he'd get some of the best physical and tactical training in the whole of the shinobi system. He'd also be under the radar for a while so the heat of taking down Orochimaru can die down. And we'd finally have a Hokage pass through our ranks. All that sounds good, and I've made similar arguments to Sandaime-sama, but he is near violently opposed to Naruto-kun becoming one of us, and I don't know how you expect to get around that, Yugao explained. Simple. I want you two and your squads to sell him on becoming one of us. I want this next month to be so enthralling he'll want to do nothing but to be an Anbu. If the request comes from him, Sandaime-sama may become more open to it. Commander, how are we to sell him without seeming obvious? Tenzo asked. He rather liked Naruto and wouldn't mind him joining their ranks, but he didn't want to be turned to ash trying to make it happen. I've made arrangements for him to stay in Anbu HQ for the month, and Tsunade will start his surgical rotation in our own medical facilities. Training him a little and showing him around won't be too harmful. He won't see anything a new recruit couldn't get access to. I also have it on good authority that he isn't very close to his teammates, so we can show him how tight Anbu squads are and how much fun we can be. I disagree with nothing you've said, Commander, but Sandaime-sama won't be so easily swayed, not even by Naruto-kun. Maybe we just have to consider him outside of our grasp. Seeing one of his top agents faltering, Dragon knew he'd have to go to his secret weapon. Retrieving a sealing scroll, Dragon unsealed the contents and held them up for Yugao to see. It was a small Anbu uniform, roughly Naruto's size, with the lynx mask. Just think of sunshine blonde hair sticking out of this mask, training with Neko-senpai, Dragon teased. Yugao, despite herself, couldn't get the image out of her head, and it was downright adorable. He'd be a little Anbu assassin. I'm going to report in, Commander, Yugao said, not trusting herself to say anything more. He dismissed her, confident his ploy had worked. Looking to his other agent, Dragon had one last card to play. Tenzo, if you can somehow let it slip that our showers are co-ed, that'd be great. The Mokuden user just sighed and left, as there was no arguing with Dragon when he got an idea cemented in his head. Naruto had just finished his debrief when Yugao arrived outside the room. There were several voices congratulating him on his actions, but all fell quiet when the Sandaime began to speak. Naruto-kun, I am sorry you will not get to compete in the finals. I had been looking forward to it, but the rules simply wouldn't allow it. I understand. Naruto started but was interrupted. Yes, we simply cannot allow Chunins to participate in the Chunin exams. It wouldn't be fair, he said with a smile as Kakashi presented Naruto his new vest. I am very proud of you, Naruto-kun, but things will only get more difficult, I'm afraid, so you must continue to push all areas of your training. Orochimaru held back. You can no longer count on anyone else underestimating you. Hi, Naruto replied. Good. Now, Chunin Uzumaki, are you ready for your first mission? It is A rank and will require your Fuinjutsu expertise. I'm ready, but can I forego payment for trade? Naruto asked. What would you like to trade? There's an Uzumaki in the exams from Kusa. Pretty red hair and eyes to match with glasses. Her team mistreats her. One held a kunai to her throat to get me to leave. You want her to relocate here? Hiruzen asked. I'd like her to have the option, Naruto answered. I'm sure we can figure something out, Hiruzen said, but internally thought if need be the Kusa team could have a collective accident. Who was to say how out of hand Orochimaru got before he was captured? With the price settled, Hiruzen began informing Naruto about his latest mission. Soon, Hiruzen departed with Tsunade and Shizune following suit, only Kakashi remained behind and favored his favorite student with an eye smile. Getting promoted mid-exams is something not even your father accomplished. Quite impressive, Naruto-kun. And even with all that was going on to find an Uzumaki damsel in distress. You really are a sly, little devil. Minato-sensei would be proud. Kakashi practically beamed and Naruto smiled back, slightly. Now that you're a Chunin, our real training can begin, Kakashi said as he tossed something toward Naruto. Familiarize yourself with that. Soon, I'm going to teach you all the ways to remove one with and without using your hands. Kakashi ignored the blast of killing intent coming from outside the room. He knew teaching the chosen one would be perilous, he'd long accepted it. Besides, danger made cool things cooler. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.